Billions of dollars flow through decentralized finance protocols every year with no central authority, no exchange license, and in most countries, no legal framework whatsoever. For most of crypto's existence, regulators have either ignored DeFi or decided it was too technically complex to legislate. That may be about to change in a fundamental way. According to posts from @CoinDesk, the Clarity Act currently advancing through the U.S. legislative process could become the first major crypto legislation globally to directly address decentralized finance. The specific quote from policy expert Rebecca Rettig was blunt: MiCA, the European Union's landmark crypto framework, doesn't touch DeFi. If the Clarity Act passes, the United States will have done something Europe's most ambitious crypto regulation could not. Here is what we are covering in this video. We explain what the Clarity Act actually proposes and why it is being called the first law to directly address DeFi globally. We look at what MiCA missed and why the EU's approach left DeFi in a regulatory gray zone. We examine Vietnam's announcement of a pilot crypto trading market and what it signals about the global race to regulate digital assets. We cover the SEC's own stated warning about leverage and gambling in crypto and what that means for the Clarity Act's content. And we close with the Ethereum Foundation restructuring story and the broader question of whether crypto's regulatory moment is finally, irreversibly here. The regulatory context for this week's developments was set earlier in the week when, on June 5, the SEC's director of the Division of Trading and Markets delivered remarks at the Piper Sandler Global Exchange and FinTech Conference addressing SEC-FTC harmonization. According to its SEC of Zone published excerpts, the director warned specifically against two outcomes: first, blurring the distinction between investing and gambling, and second, extending unhealthy levels of leverage to unsophisticated and unsuspecting investors. Those two warnings are not abstract, they describe precisely the behaviors that unregulated DeFi protocols enable at scale, and they frame the legislative appetite that produced the Clarity Act. The most consequential disclosure came on June 6 when @CoinDesk reported on remarks by Rebecca Rettig, a prominent crypto policy attorney, who stated that the Clarity Act could become the first major crypto legislation globally to directly address DeFi, adding the critical context that MiCA, the European Union's comprehensive crypto regulation, does not touch DeFi. This is a significant statement. MiCA took years to negotiate, covers centralized exchanges, stablecoin issuers, and crypto asset service providers comprehensively, and yet leaves decentralized protocols entirely outside its scope. If the Clarity Act fills that gap, it would give the United States a first-mover advantage in defining the rules for the fastest-growing segment of the digital asset market. On June 7, @CoinDesk added two further data points. Vietnam's securities regulator announced the country is entering a pivotal phase in digital finance, with plans for a pilot crypto asset trading market, a notable development given that Vietnam ranks 7th globally in crypto users and 5th in transaction growth, making it one of the world's most significant crypto adoption markets operating without a formal framework. And separately, @CoinDesk reported that Joseph Lubin, co-founder of Ethereum, described recent Ethereum Foundation cuts and departures as not a crisis but a necessary evolution, a characterization that will be tested by the market's interpretation of leadership continuity at the world's leading smart contract platform. The first question many in the crypto community are asking is, why is the US, which has historically been seen as hostile to crypto regulation, now potentially writing the world's first DeFi law? The short answer is that the landscape shifted dramatically under the current administration. The SEC under Chairman Paul Atkins has signaled a more constructive relationship with the crypto industry than its predecessor, and the Clarity Act reflects a bipartisan congressional appetite for providing legal certainty to an industry that has been operating in regulatory limbo. According to its SEC of Zone public remarks, the goal is to distinguish investing from gambling and to prevent leverage exploitation of retail investors, goals that a properly crafted DeFi framework could advance while still allowing innovation. A second pressing question is what the gap in MiCA actually means in practice, and why the EU did not address DeFi. On that front, the answer is partly technical and partly political. DeFi protocols do not have a legal entity, a registered address, or a named operator in most jurisdictions, which makes them extremely difficult to regulate under a framework designed for licensed financial intermediaries. MiCA's architects made the pragmatic decision to defer DeFi to future legislation rather than attempt to fit a square peg into a round hole. The Clarity Act's approach, if the reporting is accurate, may take a different path, potentially focusing on the on-ramps and off-ramps to DeFi protocols rather than the protocols themselves, or defining a new class of digital commodity that sits outside existing securities and commodities frameworks. Some analysts suggest that getting this right is worth a decade of regulatory clarity. Getting it wrong could either stifle innovation or create the legal loophole that the SEC's director specifically warned against. And the timing of the New York Supreme Court staying a lawsuit over nearly 40,000 dormant Bitcoin wallets, as reported by Cointelegraph, is a reminder that property rights and legal ownership of digital assets remain contested at the most basic level. Why is the US historically seen as hostile to crypto now potentially writing the world's first DeFi law? The SEC under Chairman Atkins has signaled a more constructive posture toward the crypto industry than its predecessor. Congressional appetite for regulatory clarity has grown bipartisanly as the industry's economic scale and the cost of regulatory uncertainty has become harder to ignore. Some analysts suggest this is also a competitiveness argument. If the EU and Asia move first with workable DeFi frameworks, US-based crypto activity will migrate offshore. Why did the EU's MiCA, the most comprehensive crypto regulation in the world, not address DeFi, and what does that gap mean? DeFi protocols lack legal personhood, registered addresses, and named operators, the basic prerequisites for a licensed intermediary framework. MiCA's architects deferred DeFi rather than attempt to regulate the unregulatable under existing legal categories. The Clarity Act may approach this differently, potentially targeting DeFi on-ramps, off-ramps, or creating a new asset category. Getting the framework right could provide a decade of legal certainty. Getting it wrong risks either stifling the sector or enshrining the regulatory loopholes it was meant to close. In the United States, the Clarity Act's passage or failure will define the legal operating environment for a crypto industry that has been running under regulatory uncertainty for the better part of a decade. For developers, exchanges, and DeFi protocols headquartered or operating in the US, legal clarity is arguably worth more than any single bull market cycle because it determines whether institutional capital can enter the space without legal risk. The SEC's director's warning about gambling and leverage is also a signal that consumer protection will be a central design criterion of any legislation that advances, which means DeFi protocols that currently offer extreme leverage to retail users may face structural restrictions regardless of their decentralized architecture. For Europe, the MiCA gap creates an uncomfortable dynamic. The EU spent years building the world's most comprehensive crypto regulatory framework and still left the fastest growing segment, DeFi, entirely unaddressed. If the Clarity Act passes and establishes a workable DeFi framework before European legislators act, the EU risks ceding regulatory agenda setting in digital finance to Washington. European crypto firms and developers are watching the Clarity Act process closely as a potential template or a competitive threat. For Vietnam and Southeast Asia, the regulatory picture is moving fast. Vietnam's announcement of a pilot crypto trading market representing a country where roughly 1 in 14 people are already active crypto users reflects the broader pattern across Southeast Asia, massive grassroots adoption driving regulators to create frameworks that accommodate rather than suppress participation. The global regulatory race is not just US versus EU, it includes the markets where crypto adoption has already happened at scale. For the Bitcoin market specifically, CoinDesk data published this week showed that Bitcoin has historically averaged a -1.47% return in June. Some accounts are reporting that the current sell-off, according to analyst commentary in the dataset, reflects capital rotation rather than fundamental deterioration, with a 2 to 3 year investment horizon cited as a reason for optimism. A fair presentation requires taking seriously the skeptical case about the Clarity Act and broader crypto regulation. The strongest argument against the DeFi law as progress framing is that regulating DeFi may be structurally impossible without compromising what makes it useful, and that any legislative framework attempting to impose compliance requirements on truly decentralized protocols risks either failing on enforcement or succeeding in ways that destroy the technology's core value proposition. Critics in the developer community argue that the SEC's warnings about gambling and leverage, while understandable from a consumer protection perspective, reflect a traditional finance lens that does not map onto permissionless protocols. The Ethereum Foundation restructuring story adds another layer. According to CoinDesk's reporting, Joseph Lubin characterized recent cuts and departures as not a crisis but a necessary evolution. That framing will comfort some observers and concern others. Governance transitions at foundational crypto infrastructure projects have historically introduced periods of uncertainty and sometimes developer exodus. Some accounts are reporting that the market's reaction to Ethereum Foundation changes will be a real-time test of whether the necessary evolution framing holds. And separately, the New York Supreme Court's decision to stay the lawsuit over 40,000 dormant Bitcoin wallets with a hearing not until July 14 is a reminder that even the most basic questions of digital asset property rights are still working their way through courts, not legislatures. Here is the detail that should not get lost. Rebecca Rettig's statement was not that the Clarity Act might be the first DeFi law in the United States. It was that it could be the first major crypto legislation globally to directly address DeFi. The EU has been regulating crypto longer than the US. They built the most comprehensive crypto framework in the world. And they left DeFi out entirely. Whatever you think about American regulatory competence, the fact that a US bill could leapfrog Europe on the most consequential gap in global crypto regulation is a significant geopolitical moment in digital finance, and most people are not paying attention to it yet. Drop your answer in the comments. Do you think the Clarity Act will be good for DeFi and crypto innovation, or will it end up restricting the very thing it's trying to regulate? This debate will define the next decade of digital finance. Tell us where you stand below, and subscribe so you catch every development as the legislation moves forward.